Hello dear learners. Topic for today's session is governance as per the World Bank, UNDP and others. We shall be discussing this topic under following headings: Introduction, governance meaning and definition, governance according to World Bank, good governance meaning and definition, evolution and references, 4 pillars of good governance, need and importance in modern times, characteristics of good governance according to World Bank, good governance according to UNDP, good governance according to OECD countries, initiative for good governance in India, challenges to good governance and conclusion. Introduction. Development in present times is being looked from a holistic perspective. The term, which earlier referred primarily to economic development achieved by any country, now accords importance to creating an environment in which people can lead productive lives. The wealth of any nation is its people. Hence, governance systems and processes which foster development of people assume importance. The term governance has gained a wider connotations, with many actors coming into field, blurring of boundaries between public and private sectors, with lesser control exercised by government. The present concept of governance looks at government interacting with various segments of society and economy to arrive at mutually acceptable decisions. Development today is not only the economic development of a country, it also means creating an environment in which people can realize their fullest form, they realize their fullest lives, because it is the people which are the wealth of any nation, and the state or nation have to work for the welfare of or well-being of their people. Ever since the evolution of development economics in the post Second World War era, the role and functions of the state have undergone vast changes, and as such the term governance has acquired a wider connotation in this perspective. Governance meaning. The term governance is derived from Greek word kybernen, which means to steer and to pilot or be at the helm of things. Governance in simple terms employs the process of decision making and its implementation. It is broader in nature and has social, political and economic dimensions. Governance is a more encompassing phenomenon than government. Government refers to the machinery and institutional arrangements of exercising the sovereign power for serving the internal and external interests of the political community, whereas governance means the process as well as the result of making authority decisions for the benefit of society. As a process too, it is more comprehensive, as it includes, along with the government, the private sector and civil society organizations. Now students, sometimes the two words, that is government and governance, are used interchangeably, but the term governance has wider meaning and implications than those of government. Well, government is the machinery, the governance is the process for delivery of schemes, policies and programs of government. So, the governance is the process of decision making and the process by which decisions are implemented or not implemented, and as a process too, it involves both public as well as private sector. Governance according to World Bank. The World Bank used the concept of governance for the first time in its report Sub-Saharan Africa, from Crisis to Sustainable Growth 1989. In this report, the bank termed the crisis confronting the region as a crisis of governance. The bank hence for the first time emphasized the need to give importance to governance. According to their interpretation, governance has 4 main components: public sector management, accountability, legal framework for development and transparency and information accessibility. Now students, development assistance to the third world countries in the post Cold War era provided by the international organizations such as World Bank, International Monetary Fund, etc., for fostering of the economic development in these countries demanded reform in the process of governance, because they wanted the best utilization of their resources or aid provided by them. So, World Bank highlighted the four major components of governance, which basically implies proper formulation and implementation of policies by the government agencies within well defined legal framework. It also emphasized on people getting necessary information and fostering openness and transparency in the system for ensuring accountability on the part of administrators as well as the politicians. World Bank in 1992 in its subsequent document titled Governance and Development defined governance as the manner in which power is exercised in the management of a country's economic and social resources for development. From its lending experiences in many developing countries, the bank came to realize that good governance is central to creating and sustaining an environment which fosters strong and equitable development, and it is an essential complement to sound economic policies. Three distinct aspects are identified in the conceptualization of governance: form of political regime, the process by which authority is exercised, the capacity of government to design, formulate and implement policies. Students, World Bank in its document titled Governance and Development in 1992 defined governance as the manner in which power is exercised in the management of a country's economic and social resources for development. Now, according to World Bank, governance depended upon the form of political regime, that is whether the political regime is parliament, they have parliamentary system, presidential system, military rule, civilian rule, authoritarian regime or a democratic system. Then the process by which authority is exercised in the management of the country's economic and social resources. Then the capacity of the government to design and formulate the policies and implement those policies. Good governance, meaning and definition. Good governance, being an adjectivated expression, connotes certain value assumptions, whereas governance as a process denotes a value free dispensations. The process of governance within a framework of open policy making, rule of law, transparent processes, accountability framework and the strong civil society is together considered as good governance. Good governance is thus a function of installation of positive virtues of administration and elimination of vices of dysfunctionalities. In short, it must have the attributes of an effective, credible and legitimate administrative system, citizen friendly, value caring and people sharing. The World Bank considered good governance as epitomized by predictable, open and enlightened policy making, a bureaucracy imbued with professional ethos acting in furtherance of a public good, the rule of law, transparent processes and a strong civil society participating in public affairs. Participation underlines the need for good governance, which is necessary for sound economic, human and institutional development. Pai Panandikar defines good governance as it pertains to a nation state which handles its people to lead a peaceful, orderly, reasonable, prosperous, participatory lives. The World Bank identified some major problems of governance as improper implementation of laws, delays in implementation of laws, absence of proper accounting, corruption, etc. Against this backdrop of malgovernance, World Bank attempted to focus on the concept of good governance, which is more transparent, open, accountable, ethical, honest, sustainable and based on rule of law, which is necessary for the sound economic, human and institutional development of the country. Evolution and references. Bhagavad Gita provides a numerous cues for good governance: leadership, dutifulness, self-realization, which were reinterpreted in modern context. Kautilya in his Arthashastra elaborated the traits of the king of a well-governed state. In the happiness of his subjects lies his happiness, in their welfare his welfare. Whatever pleases himself he does not considered as good. Whatever pleases is his subjects he considered as good. Mahatma Gandhi had propounded the concept of Swaraj. Now students, this concept of good governance is not a new one. The pursuit of it is as old as our civilization. We find traces of good governance in Bhagavad Gita, which talks of a dutiful ruler. Similarly, Kautilya in his treatise Arthashastra states that in the welfare of his subjects lies the welfare of the ruler. Now coming over to modern times, father of our nation Mahatma Gandhi also talked about the concepts of Swaraj, Antyodaya and Sarvodaya. 4 pillars of good governance. Good governance aims at providing an environment in which all citizens, irrespective of class, caste and gender, can develop to their full potential. In addition, good governance also aims at providing public services effectively, efficiently and equitably to the citizens. The 4 pillars on which the edifice of good governance rests in essence are ethos, ethic, equity, efficiency. Students, the concept of good governance aims at development of full potential of all the people of the land. Its construction rests on mainly 4 pillars, namely ethos, that is providing service to the citizens, ethics, that is integrity, honesty and transparency, equity, equal treatment, treating all citizens alike with empathy to the weaker sections of the society, then efficiency, that is speedy and effective delivery of all the services and maximum utilization of information and communication technology. Need and importance in modern times. The concept of good governance has acquired increased importance since 1990, largely because international donor agencies began to recognize that governance issues are important for sustained development and systematic transformation and need to be incorporated in aid policies. Multilateral agencies initiated the provision of aid that was supposed to be linked with improvement of the country's governing systems. It is the failure in developmental efforts that brought forth into prominence the need for as well as identification of the principal elements or constituents of good governance. The term good governance comprehends both the processes and procedures as well as substantial concerns. It is only then that sustainable development is really possible. Students, this concept of good governance has acquired increased importance in the post-Cold War era, largely because the international aid agencies which were providing monetary aid to the developing countries, they began to recognize its absence as a serious barrier to the economic development for developing countries, which was their main objective behind providing the aid to these countries. Aspect of good governance according to World Bank: political accountability, freedom of association and participation, and established legal framework based on the rule of law, bureaucratic accountability, freedom of information needed for formulation of public policies, a sound administrative system leading to efficiency and effectiveness, cooperation between the government and civil society organizations. Learners, World Bank has identified a number of aspects of good governance which has assumed significance for both developed as well as developing countries. First of all, political accountability, including the acceptability of political system by the people and regular elections to legitimize the exercise of political power. Then freedom by various religious, social, economic, cultural, professional groups in the process of governance. Then independence of judiciary to protect the human rights, secure social justice, Then bureaucratic accountability. Next, freedom of information needed for the formulation of public policies and decision making. Then sound administrative system leading to efficiency and effectiveness, that is value for money and cost effectiveness. Then cooperation between the governments and the civil society organizations. Characteristics of good governance according to World Bank. World Bank has outlined certain basic characteristics of good governance. These include participation, rule of law, transparency, responsiveness, equity, effectiveness and efficiency, accountability, predictability. Students, World Bank has outlined certain basic postulates of good governance. They are, first of all, participation. This is considered as the core of good governance, participation of citizens in decision making processes. Then rule of law. There should be a legal framework to govern, that is appropriate law enforcement machinery and independent judiciary. Transparency, that is openness in the administration and free flow of information. Then responsiveness, that is institutions and processes try to serve all the stakeholders. Equity, all men and women should have opportunities for maintaining their well-being, that is equal treatment. Effectiveness and efficiency in the usage of resources, that is making best and optimum utilization of the resources. Accountability, that is answerability by the politicians and administrators for all their activities. Predictability, that is presence of clear-cut laws and regulations that regulate the society and economy. Good governance according to UNDP. In a UNDP workshop on governance for sustainable human development, certain characteristics of good governance were identified. These include participatory in nature, responsiveness to people, able to develop resources and methods of governance, operates by rule of law, enabling, facilitating and regulating rather than controlling, service oriented, sustainable, acceptable to people, fostering equity and equality, promoting gender balance, accountable. Now students, United Nations Development Programme for Sustainable Human Development has outlined basic characteristics of good governance. They include it should be participatory in nature, it should be responsive to the needs of the people, it should be operating by the rule of law, it should be service oriented, it should provide for sustainable development, it should be acceptable to the people, it should promote gender balance, and it should be answerable and accountable to the management. Now students, let us talk about good governance according to the OECD countries. Most pronounced political meaning of governance appeared in the policy directives of the OECD countries, laying down conditionalities for receiving economic assistance. The OECD documents sought to link development assistance with participatory development, human rights and democratization. The key components of governance were identified as legitimacy of government, accountability of political and official elements of government, competence of government to make policy and deliver services, and respect for human rights and rule of law. Now students, the OECD countries, that is Organization for Economic Cooperation, they have laid down the various conditionalities for receiving the economic assistance by the developing nations. The OECD document provided development assistance with participatory development, human rights and democratization. They identified certain key components of good governance as the legitimacy of the government, that is the political regime should be legitimate, then accountability of the political and administrative elements of the government, then competence of government to make the policies and deliver the policies, then respect for human rights and the concept of rule of law. Now, initiatives for good governance in India. Right to information, RTI Act was brought into force in 2005. It promotes openness, transparency, accountability in administration by making government more open to public scrutiny. E-governance. The National E-Governance Plan actively delivers better programming and services in the era of newly emerging information and communication technology, which herald new opportunities for rapid social and economic transformation worldwide. Legal reforms. The central government has scrapped nearly 1500 obsolete rules and laws and reformed criminal justice and procedural laws. Police reforms. Modernizing police force and implementing Model Police Act 2015, introducing filing e-FIR for minor offences. Now, students, Government of India has taken various initiatives for the good governance in the country. Right to Information Act have been brought into force in 2005, and you can demand information from any public offices and it is duty bound to provide you the information. Then we have the concept of e-governance. It was also introduced, that is e-governance using maximum use of information and communication technology in the governance. Then various legal reforms have been introduced by the government. It has done away with nearly 1500 outdated laws. Then government has introduced police reforms. It has modernized the police forces, and e-FIR has also been introduced in the police reforms. Ease of doing business, bankruptcy code, goods and service tax, anti-money laundering law and Make in India initiative, decentralization, replacing centralized planning commission with think tank called Niti Aayog, 14th Finance Commission, increased tax devolution of the divisible pool to states from 32% to 42% for the year 2015 to 2022. Launching of Good Governance Index in 2019, focus on minimum government and maximum governance. Students, government has introduced various laws. They have introduced bankruptcy code, they have introduced GST, goods and service tax in the field of economics, anti-money laundering law have been brought into force. Then to implement the decentralization in the country, the centralized planning commission have been replaced by a new think tank, that is Niti Aayog, National Institute for Transforming India, in 2015. Then Good Governance Index have been launched in 2019, and there is a focus on the minimum government and maximum governance to brought about a good governance in the country. Challenges to good governance: criminalization of politics, corruption, gender disparity, growing incidence of violence, delay in justice, centralization of administrative system, marginalization of socially and economically backward people. Students, there are various challenges to the concept of good governance in the country. First of all, there is a criminalization of politics, then there is a lot of corruption, then we have a gender disparity in the country which hinders the concept of good governance, then growing incidences of violence in the country, delay in receiving justice by the people, centralization of all the administrative activities, and the marginalization of socially and economically poor and backward sections of the society hinders a lot to the concept of good governance. Conclusion: the search for good governance seemingly is an endless one. It has been an eternal challenge to rulers since the very dawn of state, irrespective of its nature, structure and form. The effective functioning of governance is the prime concern of every citizen of the country. The citizens are ready to pay the price for good services offered by the state, but what is required is a transparent, accountable and intelligible governance system, absolutely free from bias and prejudices. The end of good governance is happiness, justice and welfare of the people. The means of good governance is promotion, operation, will and moral power of the people. There is a need to reformulate our strategy to accord privacy to Gandhian principle of Antyodaya, to restore good governance through probity in government. So, students, we see that the search and process for good governance is an endless one. It is a dynamic concept. It encompasses fast changing political, social and economic milieu, along with the international environment which is also changing. There is a need for periodical rethinking and remodeling of the concepts and institutions of governance. Now, there is a need for periodical rethinking and remodeling of the concepts and institutions of governance. It is very apt here to quote Alexander Pope, for the forms of the government, let fools contest. Whatever is best administered is best. So, students, with this we come to the end of today's lecture on the concept of governance according to World Bank, UNDP and others. We have discussed the meaning, concept, nature, postulates and characteristics of the governance, concept of good governance according to World Bank, why there is a need for good governance and what are the various hindrances in the way of good governance. So, I hope this lecture will prove beneficial to all the students. Thank you for listening patiently.